This is the fifth session in our new series, the Philosophy Discussion Program. The series is called Coping with Reality. Can Philosophy Help? We will play a short video by John and Ronan Grunberg, and then move on to the discussion. Tonight's topic is Metaphysical Realism. Ronan and John will look at the ideas underlying the concept of the nature of reality. People often think they know what this is, but do they? Ronan, can you play the video, please?
Okay, so I'm going to just move out of the way, and then I will play the video. Okay, so that's it. Now it's time for some discussion. So John, can you put us back on gallery view, please?
Thanks, Ronan. First, Tori Biles will act as a formal discussant. Tori, can you take 10 minutes or so, please, to have your discussant?
Sure. Thanks, Alla. I'll do that. Hopefully in 10 minutes, maybe 15. But I'd like to just say that I thought the discussion generally was going in the right direction. I think it was a little bit scattered, and there's some things that I found to be kind of inconsistent. So what I thought I would do is give as clear a statement of metaphysical realism as I can, and in effect, try to contrast it with critical realism, as John and Ronan were trying to do. So, and I'm going to draw largely from John Searle, philosopher, an American philosopher, and for these comments. So, the basic thing that I did agree with John and Ronan was that the reversal of the Cartesian maxim, you know, I think, therefore I am, is what Descartes said, but it's really I am, therefore I think. And I would even add, it's the way I am, the kind of activity I do is the way I think. So in other words, existence and consciousness are coterminous. They're one and the same thing. To be is to have beliefs about reality. So realism is not a theory of truth. It's not a theory of knowledge. It's not a theory of language. If you need to put a pigeonhole on it, it's an ontological theory. It says that there exists a reality that's completely independent of our representations. Realism is the view that there is a way that things are that is independent of all human representations. So realism doesn't say how things are, but only that there is the way that they are. And things in these two sentences does not mean material objects or even objects. It is like when you say it is raining. It sounds like an object, but it's not really it's reality. It's rainingness, you know, the beingness of raining. That's what realism refers to. So reality just is. Reality is the beingness of things. This is what ontology means. Ontology means the beingness of things. Our representations and views and beliefs about reality are our epistemology of reality. So ontology is what is real, and epistemology is our beliefs and representations of what is real. And let me just say one more thing generally. The difference between realism and, say, critical realism is that realism holds that something can be real without physically existing. Now, all things that are physically existing are real, but not all things that are real exist. So reality is not existed by physical existence. So again, this is where consciousness and existence come together. So one of the longest traditions in philosophy, particularly Western philosophy, is to believe that somehow truth and reality should coincide. Truth should provide an exact mirror of reality. The nature of reality itself would provide the exact structure of true statements. So what's been debated since Plato, since pre-Socratics, all the way to the logical positivists of the 20th century, is that we can't find this exact isomorphism between the structure of reality and the structure of true representation. This is bedeviled philosophy in the West, but it's occurred because of this false misconception of the relationship between truth and reality. Truth and reality cannot coincide in this isomorphic way. And the reason is all representation is always under certain aspects and not others. Representation is always made from within a conceptual scheme and from a certain point of view. So for example, this piece of reality in front of me I can represent it as water, but I can also represent it as H2O. There's two different representations for the same stuff. So in fact, there's probably other ways to represent the same thing, the same piece of reality. So it's really impossible to get the coincidence between truth and reality that philosophers have tried to get. So every representation has an aspectual shape to it. It represents its target under certain aspects, but not others. And so it's only from a point of view that we represent reality, that we have epistemology. That's the epistemology. But ontologically objective reality, which includes more than just physical reality, but ontological objective reality does not have a point of view. It just is. Reality just is. Reality is the beingness of things. That's what ontology means. Our representations and beliefs about reality, that's what epistemology means. So let me I'm going to list 8 distinctions, 8 pairs of distinctions that really cause a lot of problems in understanding what metaphysical realism is compared to what critical realism is, critical realism. So I'm going to list 8. I could put them on a board, but to help you remember better. But I'll list them out loud. And I want you to think with each pair. Realism includes both sides of the pair, whereas critical realism only includes the second item in the pair. So the first dichotomy, the first pair, is subject-object. So realism includes both of them. Critical realism only, like Cartesian and Kantian critical realism, only thinks objects are real. Okay, so that's the first pair, subject-object. Knowledge through representation and reality. Epistemology and ontology. Reason and empiricism. Mind and body. Idealism and materialism. Metaphor, literal. Understanding, meaning, and truth, reality. So again, realism holds both sides of each dichotomy as reality. Critical realism just contains the second terms in those dichotomies. So, and think of it this way. So we have true theories of the same physical reality, such as Newtonian physics, thermodynamics of heat and energy, electromagnetism, quantum theory of very small atomic spaces, relativity theory of very large universe-wide spaces. They're all sort of the same thing, and they're all true. And so they're all real, but they're not isomorphic, or they're isomorphic only in their paradigm of looking at things. They are they're isomorphic only in that pair, those aspects that they want to focus on. So they're true representations, and being true representations, they become part of reality. False representations, or representations that are, and beliefs that are proven to be false, are not real. So our epistemology is part of the ontology of reality. And we can have multiple truths of the same reality. So when we have that, what is the difference when there's many possible true representations that remain? And how do we distinguish? There's two problems with this. First is, how do you distinguish a true theory, true representation, from a false one? And then the second problem is, if you can have multiple representations of the same thing, what's the difference between these multiple representations? What's the difference between all these different theories of the same sort of physical environment? So the first thing is, of course, the scientific method. We do a lot of experiments. We make a hypothesis. We test it. We do, probably with a lot of experimenters doing tests, testing the hypothesis, and we generally start adjusting the hypothesis and how we're representing a law of nature. And pretty soon we start converging on a true representation. The second problem of this, so that starts eliminating the false theories, the false epistemology. The second problem of distinguishing, what's the difference between the different theories of the same reality, comes down to what the intention of the theory is, and what the kind of outcomes of performing whatever law we discover we can make or do something with. So thermodynamics helps us understand how to build say an internal combustion engine. Einsteinian theory makes us understand how big space is, that kind of thing. So the point here is, the truths and the beliefs, they're not merely static representations, but they are basically dispositions to behave in a certain way to achieve certain outcomes. This is sort of the pragmatic maxim, first discovered, or first enunciated by Charles Sanders Peirce, an American philosopher. But it converges also with existential and phenomenological philosophy of Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty. So these kinds of, realism, and one of the ironies here is that realism is kind of what the Greeks were trying to get at. And then with the scientific revolution of Descartes and Newton and eventually Hume and Kant, they switched and got to be a very materialistic, empirical kind of critical realism. Now, I want to just say one last thing about social facts versus brute facts that Ronan and John talked about. So human-made, as they said, and this is true, human-made institutions like money, property, government, corporations, presentations online, cocktail parties, these social facts are objective epistemologically. They really are real, but they're ontologically subjective. They're kind of only in our mind. They're real, but they only because a community believes them to be real. So these social facts, in a way, and to be quick about it, is sort of reverses the process of deriving true beliefs that the scientific method has. So when beliefs are as dispositions to behave in certain ways, we start discovering the laws of physical reality by seeing how if we do certain injunctions putting some solution together, we'll get an explosion or something. We can start articulating and representing a law of nature. That's how, physical laws are created, or the true beliefs and the true epistemology of reality is done in the scientific method about physical reality. But in social facts, we sort of reverse the process. We declare things to be true and real, and then we induce ourselves to act accordingly. So we invent this thing called money, and then we start using it to transfer property and do different things. And we actually even change ourselves. We take on new roles as a buyer or a seller or an employee and an employer. So these things, these social facts are subjectively, they're ontologically subjective. They only sort of exist in our minds, but they are epistemologically factual. They are real facts. So it's kind of the reverse of the scientific method in a way. So, and let me quote Cyril here. There's several remarkable features of human language. None is more remarkable than this. In human languages, we have the capacity not only to represent reality, both how it is and how we want to make it be, but we also have the capacity to create a new reality by representing that reality as already existing. So, when the preacher or the civil servant says, "I now declare you man and wife," they are now married. It's created a new reality. Or when a bank gives a mortgage to somebody and they just say, "Okay, now you have a checking account with 100 grand in it," the money was just declared into existence. So language allows us to make social facts. And it's really only because we're really starting to learn about language in recent centuries that we're aware of this power of language. The Greeks did not have a word for language as separate from reason. They just had logos, but they did not have a word for language. Okay, so I'm going to give a talk next week on a little bit more about the difference between philosophy and psychology, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about these things. One thing, how much time do I have? Ala or John? I don't see those two there, but I would just say some of the other things made in the remarks with John and Ronan, I did not agree with that. The axiomatic approach to realism, to me, axiomatic systems are consistent within a paradigm, but you don't prove realism through an axiomatic system. So axiomatic systems are just like theories, and just like they're a set of mutually consistent representations. Also, the philosophical order, I don't really think of it that way. It's actually, I think, kind of a transcendental approach to realism, which is kind of an odd way to argue against transcendental realism, and a couple other things. But I think one of the issues here that I think it's difficult to talk about realism versus critical realism, ontology versus epistemology, is that there's a deeper point that just because we become aware of how our culture and language and legacy philosophies of reality condition our thinking, just because we become aware that there's different kinds of philosophies of reality or different kinds of metaphysics, does not automatically free us from their influence on our thinking. It's not, we just because we become aware, they don't automatically disappear and we adopt something else. We don't really choose metaphysical dispositions, for example. We have to learn that, and actually, Jean Piaget, French developmental psychologist in the 20th century, speaks to this issue, how the actual ontology of the person changes as we see new perspectives and understand ourselves in new ways that we didn't know about before. So that's another part of realism, is that the agent, the actor, the human being has an ontological transformation as they have epistemological insights about the world. So anyway, and again, I'll be talking about some more of that next week. Well, those are my comments.
Yeah. So Ala's not here, so I'll carry on. Thanks a lot, Tori, for what we said. So I guess
I guess Ronan will be moderator, right?
yeah, I was going to say, Ronan, you're going to be the moderator for the question. So
Sure,
we'll move on
I will be happy to take on that role.
for the question. Thanks a lot, Tori, for what you said.
Okay, so
Henry did have a question.
yeah, so I'm going to open up the floor. I did see Henry's hand up. So Henry, did you want to ask a question? Is Henry here?
No, he's not. Oh, yes, he is.
There's Henry right there. Henry, you can ask your question now, but you've got to unmute yourself first.
First, I want to confirm if you can hear me well. I have trouble with my microphone. Is it okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, that's good. First of all, thank you for the nice presentation. It was good. I enjoyed it, very insightful. And another thing is, I was a little bit confused with this, the whole description and definition of axiom. Because as you said, and I believe we all agree that axiom is something self-evident. In order to be self-evident, it should be based on a general logic or reason or common sense, if you will. And then we mentioned that it's some kind of recites of the intuitive approach, intuition. And this is where I got confused, because intuition is individual. It's, I would say, it's individual feeling. There is no such a thing as a public intuition or mass intuition, and it's very individual. While axiom should be self-evident to all, or to majority at least. So this is where the conflict comes into play. And if you can explain me, I would appreciate it.
I was the one who mentioned the idea of intuition. I was using the word in terms of not intuition in the sense that intuition is often used. I was using the word intuition as in something that we don't think about, but we just know is the truth. That's the way things are. It's not something that has to be a part of our cognition. For example, I just know by way of intuition that I can't be here and somewhere else at the same time. It's not possible. It's something that I don't have to think about. It's just something I feel. And the same would be true of other people, or that, something can't both be and not be at the same time. It's either or it's not. We just know it. We don't have to really reflect on it or even present a logical argument. It's, something that I just know by way of intuition. So that's what I was talking about when I mentioned the word intuition. But it's a confusing word. Maybe I shouldn't have used it. It's a confusing word because it has a populist meaning. So Descartes also mentions or talks about intuition. He says that we know things by way of intuition and deduction, and intuition is just something that we know is a kind of a given. It's something that we just know by way of almost a feeling. that it's true. We don't have to, formulate an argument for it. It's just something that we just know it. But there are populist notions of intuition which are problematic and that kind of get in the way. I'm using it in a philosophical sense.
Well, I think I understand. In terms of intuition, axiom, what unites them is our approach. We accept our intuition by default, right? We don't need a proof or logic or something. And the same approach we apply to axiom.
Yeah. So in terms of intuition, I mean, you might intuit something, just you think it's the way it is, but that doesn't preclude you from using logic, in this as a second step to confirm it, in a more solid sort of logical way. So, starting off with intuition and moving on to something else is not a bad approach, I think.
Right, but the only thing is there are situations when the intuition and logic don't like each other. They contradict, and then they have to choose which one you have to follow.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, I mean, if you do get into that situation, then you've got some choices to make, and you've got to figure out why your intuition tells you this, and then your logic tells you something else. And so that could be a problem that needs to be solved for sure.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Richard. You're next, Richard.
Yeah. There's what passes for intuition, which is merely the activity of a brain that is highly programmed and conditioned. True intuition happens when the brain is the activity, let's put it this way, it's the activity of a brain that is totally free of all conditioning, all programming. Then we say intuition is happening. So intuition implies connection, communication, not merely verbal, a sense of oneness, no division, no sense of psychological division or separation. And then intuition is happening.
One of the problems with intuition, I mean, I agree with you, Richard. One of the problems with intuition is that it can't be taught. Logic can be taught. Mathematics can be taught. Science can be taught. You can go into a classroom and you can be taught how to think, but you can't be taught how to intuit. However, given that fact that you cannot be taught how to intuit, I do think that intuition plays a very important role in knowledge and epistemology. If you look at Einstein's theories, Einstein had, an idea. It wasn't even an idea. It was like an intuition that, he could actually explain why light is constant, regardless of the observer and the speed of the observer. It's always measured in the same way, regardless of the speed of the observer. So he had an idea that wasn't really an idea. It came to him by way of an intuition that he could, that there was an answer to that, and that he could figure it out. So intuition is important in epistemology, but it's not something
the observer blocks intuition. The observer blocks intuition.
Yeah.
As long as there's an observer, there's no true intuition happening. There's just the movement of Paul, the thinker, which is the past, which is a reaction of the memories of the past, the knowing. It's not what's happening now. Something is happening now, but you're not present. You're not paying attention. You're never listening. You're not in direct contact with what is, the isness.
Yeah. I do agree. Intuition requires you to be attentive and to be observe in the moment, and I think that's true.
Pure
Earl-
observation without the observer.
Mhm,
Pure observation without the observer.
mhm,
Then observation is happening.
mm.
As long as there's an observer, there's no observation happening. There's only illusion making happening.
That sounds very Buddhist, but I thank you for that. Earl.
Thank you, Ronan. I want to apologize first for not posting a picture, but I'm running Windows 7 and Zoom won't let me post pictures. I'm supposed to upgrade to Windows 10. My problem with intuition is that I can't tell the difference. A problem presents itself to me, and a solution appears in my mind that I didn't reason out, but is very often the result of solutions and reasoning that I did long ago, maybe when I was a baby and I learned things, maybe a beginning of a career, 2 careers ago, 40 years ago, I solved this problem, and my intuition, I get this internal feeling that I ought to turn right, and I turn right and it works out. But I don't know whether that was something genetic, biological, built into my mind, or whether it's just a solution that came up out of my subconscious because long ago it's something that I learned.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a good question. Does anybody else want to respond to that? I mean, what is the root of the things that we intuit? I'm also curious to know, I mean, does anybody think that the notion of intuition is completely superfluous and it has no place in knowledge? Tori, you think that intuition is superfluous?
Knowledge
Yeah,
prevents
think it-
intuition.
I think it's
Knowledge is the past. Intuition is the now.
Yeah, let Tori answer.
I think it's misconceived what intuition is. I mean, yeah, I like what Richard's saying, but I wouldn't call that intuition. I would just call being in the now moment and being completely without judgment or about discernment, just being sort of like dumb awareness, you might, inarticulate awareness or something like that. I believe in unconsciousness, an unconsciousness that arises, and and that's just a metaphorical way of saying something. But you have your body and mind has memories and has experience impressed in it, and from those experiences, sort of a memory comes out, and you can call that, or an insight to how to go do something, and you can call that intuition. But I don't think, but I think of that more as, there our consciousness and our knowledge is sort of ready out of experience. There's a sort of a wide scope that we're sort of cognitively processing, and intuition is suddenly kind of a jumping to some part of that conscious focus that may have been unconscious before, and it comes into consciousness, let's say, and that's, we can call that intuition. But I think it's, there's some philosophers that say that there's the Cartesian. Descartes really thought intuition was, the way to find truth. And certainly there's a lot of stories and, history and example cases where inventors had intuitive flashes and so on and so forth that, were truths that were suddenly came out of nowhere. But I just think it's, it's not conceived that, it just seems kind of like a sort of a shallow explanation to think of intuition somehow.
Thank you, Tori. Rick.
My take on intuition is that a lot of it, or probably all of it, is memories from way back when you learned how to do something, or you remembered reading about someone solving a particular problem in a certain way, and your brain goes to work and does it. A lot of people don't remember stuff from way back. Their brain, those memories are still there. They're just not accessible to most people anymore. Like I can remember talking to my brothers over the year we go visiting or for birthdays, weddings, that I'm telling them stuff that I remember them doing when they were kids or teenagers, and they say, I don't remember doing that, but for me it's like it was yesterday. I'm one of those guys who has a memory that I remember almost everything. It's a pain in the butt sometimes because you can't forget the stupid things you did, but you remember the other things you did too. And when I have an intuition about how to solve a problem, it's usually because many years ago or months ago or whatever, I solved something similar and the same idea pops back in my head. A lot of what goes on in your brain is really unconscious. Like an example, a very simple example for me is those the word scramble puzzles in the newspaper every day. I can most times I can just look at the anagram there, and the word just pops in my head within a second or two, and that's it. The odd time that's a word I never use or rarely see, those are the only ones that give me trouble. I never write anything down. I just see it, the 5 or 6 scrambled letters, and oh yeah, that's this word.
Mm-hmm.
Intuition. It sounds like intuition, but it's just memory.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well that's interesting. John, you gotta unmute yourself, John.
Yeah, I had the intuition that I must do that at some point. So I want to take up on what Earl said and what Richard sorry, Rick. It's actually Richard did mention these things earlier too. And it's this, Ronan, when you use the expression intuition, do you mean by that pretty much what Lonergan means by insight?
Yeah, so I think it's close to that. So as I said before, intuition is a word that unfortunately doesn't work when we're talking about knowledge and getting a sense of what the nature of reality is. What I mean by intuition is a feeling that something is self-evident. You just know it. Okay, it's a self-evident truth. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to argue it. You just intuit that something is the case. It's just self-evident, and there's no need to really think about it logically. It doesn't preclude you from thinking about it logically, but you just know that something, you perceive it as a self-evident truth. So I do think that, where that comes from is a good question. And, it may come from experience, and it may kind of, experience gives us stuff that reaches a point that gives us intuition about the nature of something. It comes from experience. And I know that with me personally, I've had issues like with certain technological problems. I'm into technology, and sometimes I build things, and I have a problem with something, and then like literally in a moment, it comes to me that this is the answer, that, this is the answer, and it's self-evident. How did I not see it before?
Yes.
And that's the kind of intuition that I'm talking about. Something that kind of is given to you almost like an epiphany, and you know that this is the case, and you should have known it before. How could I have missed it?
Yes. But are we dealing with it in the, I mean, did you morph into this discussion by, first of all, discussing axiom? Is that how this came about?
Yeah, I think that we were talking about axioms, and I did mention the idea of intuition. And
I'm not going to pursue this much further, but I don't think that's the right way to look at axiom. Yeah, axiom, they're self-evident because they're self-evident. It's not a question of intuition. It's more a question of logic.
okay.
Right?
Well, that's a debatable point, but that's fine.
No, it's a different thing. Whereas my mind is naturally taken on to, remember, the ultimate objective that we're trying to discuss is the distinction between critical realism and metaphysical realism. And ultimately, at a practical level, at the level of methodology, you come back to that same method, which we talked about in the talk, namely the abduction or the retroduction. In short, the detective method.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's let Howard.
Let me just finish that a little bit. I'm just going to leave it there. Now I think we've shifted the discussion to, as it were, the epistemology, and we're now talking more about what Lonergan talked about by insight. And this is where Rick, and this is where Richard, and this is where somebody else were right. The key question there, I think, is does that insight come from the blue, as it were? Is there a transcendental element to it? That's definitely what Lonergan would insist. Or his example of the detective, in the traditional detective mystery, they look into all the facts, they look at all the data is planted, it's not necessarily false. They have to sort it all out for themselves. And then insight is when they suddenly put it all together. But I think the key question which distinguishes between critical realism and metaphysical realism is, where does that insight, to use Lonergan's term, come from? Does it come from the hard work that you've done up to that point, and all of a sudden it comes together? In short, it's not transcendental. It comes from the prior work that you've done on that, and all of a sudden it fits into place. Or is it transcendental in some sense? And then you be into the Kantian world and so on and so forth.
Okay.
I'm just going to leave it there. But I think, and Rick and others can correct me, I think that's what Rick was saying. Like, the insight is based on what you've done before.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Absolutely. Yeah.
Before, as opposed to, as it were, coming from the blue. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, John. Howard.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm kind of suspicious of things that are presented as self-evident, because I think of lots of the sort of historical examples where lots of things were taken to be self-evident that were subsequently, dispelled by more rigorous investigation. In terms of John's point, I guess I'll answer that even more materially and talk about sort of memory and the psychological basis of intuition, coming from neural platforms and neural configurations, embedded neural patterns that just require a stimulus for, a series of neural reconnections. So, I would, rather than a transcendental agency, I would put it in even more brutally materialistic terms, and remind us of brain science and stimulus and neural platforms, and latent electrical energy inside the brain or something, to put it kind of really crudely. But I think all that is fascinating and opens up all sorts of possibilities. So, I mean, on one hand, it's reductive. On the other hand, it's fabulously open-ended.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Howard. So I guess you're saying that it's biologically sort of emergent, almost intuition.
Yeah, I mean that's typically my orientation. Sort of. Yeah, I'll go with that for now. I mean, I think with Tori that the term is fuzzy, so I'm not comfortable with it, and maybe it has something to do with how the term has evolved in the culture. I think in terms of etymology, the originally comes from the Latin meaning to look upon, and then in the 18th century it evolved to include more formal study. So the meaning of the word, which is one of the problems I think with identity theory, is meaning of the words. When you say A is not B, or we are a family, to take that, that identity itself, that identity mark.
Well, Howard is frozen, but I will say that
markers change.
I will say that I apologize for opening the Pandora's box of intuition by briefly saying the word in the presentation. I didn't realize it would open up such a conversation, because it was a throwaway thing, really. But Will, you've got the floor.
It's not quite a Pandora's box, Ronan, because it's the same topic I want to sort of add my penny's worth on. The first comment is that Tori's thought was that intuition being the truth that comes out of nowhere. I find that intriguing. And I'll just add my two brief comments along the same lines. I've not thought about them for long, so I've just so they haven't undergone any great scrutiny. My first take on intuition is we could say a gut feeling that proves to be correct in the long run. Would that be a fair, another fair view of intuition? And my second and last one is, to me, we could think of intuition as answers that come to us when we are not asking the questions. I just want to share those, throw those out. As I said, I haven't scrutinized them myself, so they are just there out in the open for further discussion.
Will,
it is obvious that the concept of intuition is touching some chord, or it's hitting some chord here with people, and I find that intriguing.
Ronan, can I just ask Will? I sort of didn't quite catch what Will said in his last sentence. Can I ask you to repeat it, Will?
Yes. My take on intuition is it could also be seen as answers that come to us when we are not asking the questions.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Answers that come to us out of the blue.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a
Rick,
good way of putting it. Yeah.
Rick.
Yes, while we were talking, I just remembered, I just got the last, this month's issue of Scientific American, and had a very interesting article in there about some people training bacteria to come to a certain food source that they really liked. Now, what they found is that even after 4 or 5 generations later, the bacteria that split and created whatever, those four generations later, they still remembered where that food source was. Bacteria have a memory. And they were trying to figure out how does a system with no nerves, no nervous system, no brain remember stuff. And they realized even there's other animals without a nervous system, like jellyfish or slime mold, they do the same thing. They have memories, or they have an awareness of their system, and they remember where a food source was, where nasty stimuli was. Also, they can remember all this, and they know where to go. It was a fascinating article on the limits of memory and how early it starts in life. You know, for the smallest of creatures, if you can even call them that it does seem to have something. And one of the hypotheses that they said memory is caused by the electrical currents inside a cell, and by that you learn by basically bumping into stuff. And that's how kids learn. They're poking and hitting and touching everything. That's how they learn how they about their environment.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, Rick, of Carl Jung's notion of the collective unconscious. He argues that we have generational memories of certain archetypal knowledge, and we sort of carry it from generation to generation, and it's something that we evolve with. And it sounds, you know, that they're kind of proving that there is something to that we do pass on sort of memory over generations, which is an interesting idea for sure.
One of the things they were doing was they were also studying flatworms, the ones where you cut them in half, the head grows a new tail, and the tail grows a new head. Again, they gave them a food source and they trained them to go there, even though over rough terrain or whatever for them. And then they cut those worms in half. The head remembers where the food source was, but so did the tail.
That's interesting. Okay, Earl. Thank you, Rick. Earl, go ahead.
Thank you, Ronan. I wanted to tackle the issue of axioms and axiomatic, which is something that doesn't require evidence or proof. It's just kind of basic understanding. And my problem is I was raised in a Christian household from birth, and so my answer to everything, in the beginning, God, okay? And the reason for that is I can't conceive of anything that exists that didn't have a creator. I just can't separate reality from creation. And God was very conveniently created in our image, and God's will and God's characteristics are very carefully reasoned over the ages, and I might say some very creative reasoning steps were taken. But I'm stuck with that. So I have, to me, it's axiomatic gravity. Now, I know there's a whole branch of science, physicists who will talk for centuries about how gravity works and what it is and whatever. But to me, it's quite simple. It makes me nervous if I go on an aircraft. So the problem with axioms is that I think Tori mentioned this. The axiom exists for me because of the way I exist, the situation I was created in, and so what for me is perfectly axiomatic, some people might disagree with. Thank you, Ronan.
Yeah, well, yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, and that's a great question. I mean, are axioms self-evident? I mean, you're saying that they may not be as self-evident as we think. Randy.
By the way, Rick, I'm kind of curious what happens once the tail of the worm finds the food. Now what? Tori, I have a question, probably a silly one, but I'm going to ask it anyways. I'm interested in the concept of justice. So how would I view that differently under critical realism and metaphysical realism?
Critical realism, say like Kant, would say something like, and actually to just in reference to the last speaker, justice might come from choosing some transcendent belief, like a belief in God. And even though you can't know this thing called God, you can believe in it and then act accordingly to how the moral strictures of that particular theological belief system would be. So, you know, there's morality in Christianity, and there's different morality in you know, say Vedic philosophies or Taoist philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, things like that. So it's sort of the transcendental position would be something like that. Believe in something that you can't confirm empirically, but just use that as a way to orient your belief system. A realist, that's a really good question, and I'm trying to work that out myself. But the realist would say, and this kind of goes against what Alla and John were talking about, this sort of linear philosophical order. You have to start and make the choice at metaphysics first before you get all the way down to ethics and politics. This is different from that, and that is realism is since the community that the language community and the community who are investigating the truth to find truth about reality, to create knowledge. And by the way, it also goes in reverse to, you know, reverse, I sort of said it in reverse, like creating social facts is sort of the reverse of scientific method. That's a real loose, fast and loose way to say it. But same with social facts. If you have a community that is bringing consensus on the truth of something, and if you want to get into the social fact side of it, a community is trying to decide a social contract, a constitution for a country, a legal system, how to have jurisprudence, how to set up a judicial system to, you know, correct injustices in society. There has to be among that members of that community who are concerned about making that social contract or making those laws or finding the truth of things. They have to have an ethical commitment to make truth or to make a right law or to know what justice is. So the connection between, say, morality or justice is in each person to be authentic and sincere and be committed. You know, there's a moral commitment to do science. There's a moral commitment to do good jurisprudence. There's a moral commitment to do monetary policy. Each member, to the best of their ability, to what they think is being honest and true, and in effect, thinking what the public good is. Even in science, there's a public good. You don't want to have bad science. For example, you don't want to have, a bad, what's the drug for, an antiviral drug. You want to have that really, a vaccine, right? Thank you. You don't want to have a false vaccine. There's the scientists who are doing the research, the public health authorities who are doing the mandates, all those kinds of things. They got to be really, honest. There's an ethics in that. Even though you're not talking about a God or any of these, higher order things, it's an ethical position. So it's a metaphysical position. There's an implied, there can be a metaphysics that without a God that still delivers moral, a moral focus, and including about justice.
Well, if I was going to overlay the concept of axioms, that sounds to me like, in one sense, the axiom is that the justice is a truth that exists outside of who we are. And the other, I'm just sort of building on what you said. And the other would be an axiom that the truth resides within us. Anyways, that was just sort of what I gleaned from what you said. But
well, that's the thing about realism. It's both and, it's outside and it's in, it's inside, but it's like our mind or our consciousness, and we come to some of these, one way to say what intuition is it's like a truth event, and we don't have the truth about reality and justice, all at once in our lives. Throughout our lives, we're having these truth events in a way, and you can call them aha moments or epiphanies, or, you've studied something very hard, or you've done a detective, figuring out a mystery. And then you have a truth event of what really happened. So again, our knowledge there's a temporal dimension to our knowledge, and we don't have, we're not omniscient, all the time, obviously. And so we come to those truth events that's, we're getting these clues, these signs and symbols that our intelligence is processing, and at some point it comes together inside of us. So it starts outside, and inside it happens. So where it originates, it's hard to say. They're all one and the same thing.
Thanks.
okay, thanks, Tori.
Yeah. One thing I would say, Randy, also, is that when it comes to justice, one of the things that I find is that when I see something that's unjust, I don't have to think that it's unjust. I just feel it. Like I intuit that this is not this is not just, this is not fair. There's something wrong here. So I think intuition does play a role in just our perception of what is right and what is not right. What is good and what is not good.
I was just kind of curious as the difference between the critical reality and the metaphysical reality in an actual concept. But that's fine. I don't want to take up any more time. But I appreciate the commentary.
Thanks, Randy. Henry.
I'd like to come back to what Rick has mentioned. He was questioning the source of memories for bacteria, for example, jellyfish, etc. So what I would like to say that our cells, and we consist of cells, any organism consists of cells, they have inner memory. Bacteria is a cell. Bacteria has memory. Jellyfish is a combination of cells. Yes, definitely it has memory. Where this memory comes from, we don't know. Well, scientists think we do know some, but again, it's very incomplete. And I'd like to connect this concept of memory again with this proverbial intuition. The thing is that intuition is often based, in my understanding, on memory, but not a memory in this life. Memory of the previous lives, accumulated during the, well, certain amount of time. Again, this might sound controversial and absurd for many. This is my personal belief. But intuition comes, since intuition doesn't use logic in many situations, you cannot explain where it comes from. But it certainly uses some base. And there are things that come into your mind which have nothing to do with your reality that you experience during your lifetime. So
Yeah, well, yeah, no, that's great, Henry. I mean, that I didn't want to bring it up, but I mean, that's Plato. I mean, you're just articulating Plato's idea that we have innate knowledge, and that knowledge is something that we remember from a past existence. Learning is just remembering what we've forgotten from a past experience. So knowledge is innate. It's not something that, it's not like we're born as a tabula rasa. We're born with knowledge, and then we have to remember it. And intuition is when that memory sort of percolates to the top, and suddenly we know something, you know. So it's just like a volcano, you know, erupting, and we, oh, I know this, it's self-evident, but it's there. It's something that we know because we've experienced it at some point. Anyway, that's the Plato's idea.
Yes, and it's coming back to the self memory. For example, and this, well, there is an organism is infected, let's say the virus, and the immune system kicks in and fights the virus. The cells, they have memory of this particular virus, or particular type of virus, or modification or mutation. And next time, it uses this memory to develop the same cells, the same T cells, we call it, to fight it. So the cells have memory.
Yeah, and thank you, Henry. Earl.
Thank you, Ronan. I wanted to go back to these issues that Tori was talking about reality, justice, truth, and morality. Did I mention that? I'm a member of a couple of conservative parties in Ontario, and I'm conservative because I think it's more moral or whatever than any other party. And I'm on the board of directors of one of the ministers. And one of the issues that we grapple with as directors on the board is how much money we should spend on hot dogs when we're holding a barbecue for the public. And we can argue about that for half an hour or so. And the reason I came here tonight, as soon as I saw the title of your little thingy that popped up on my computer, is because it's been a while since I went to church, and I need to spend some time on this. And we have a whole group of people here who are spending a considerable amount of time grappling with these issues. And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Rick.
Oh, just before you go, Rick, I want to say you and Shishir, two last questions for tonight because we're running out of time. Shishir, the last one. Go ahead. Sorry, Rick.
Yeah, I just wanted to reply to Henry. He was asking about changes in people and having it passed on to different generations. And there have been studies on that. People who've been through an extremely stressful event, like a natural disaster or a war, the stress their body goes through does change their genetics a little bit, and that is passed on to their kids, and their kids have that reaction will have that same stress reaction if a similar stressful situation comes up again. It's being studied now. It's there are changes in your DNA if you're under stress, if you're extremely stressed with something or other. And yeah, and that can be passed on. Yes, it can. And one other thing, talking about axioms. I've been, since retired, I've been studying a little bit of mathematics on my own. And one of the things I was interested in was set theory and the axioms of set theory, which is the basis for all mathematics. And there is a bit of controversy on what axioms are the ones they should be using in mathematics, and one in particular, the axiom of choice. A lot of mathematicians are very leery of using it or accepting it as an axiom, and they're trying to prove their theories or their mathematical theorems without resorting to that if they can. They want to get away from it because it creates paradoxes in math.
Thank you, Rick. That's very interesting, actually. I appreciate that. Thanks. Shishir, last and definitely not least.
Thank you, Ronan. It was a very exciting and educational session today. We veered off from realism into intuition, into axioms, and I really believe very much that the intuition side seems to have taken the lead. Having said that, the sixth sense we talk about, the gut feeling, the butterflies in the stomach, the insights, the immediate insights that we get, the aha moments that we get, are these thought through? No, they're not thought through. They just come, they appear out of nowhere, almost an experiential experience. And this is where Buddhism comes in and talks about knowledge being accumulated without needing to go search. It comes from within. So that's something that's very interesting that I can kind of correlate that. The other thing about the intergenerational memories. Yes, I do believe kids born of slaves carried that intergenerational memory, and they behave differently. Had they been brought up differently or born otherwise, that could have been very different. So there is definitely some proof to that. And then about justice that Randy brought up. You know, in the Eastern tradition, there is such a thing as reincarnation, where Henry was going, whereby your justice also follows you with whatever karma that you did in the previous life. So the continuation of justice is self-regulating in that fashion, which is something that people who believe in that would tend to agree with and say, okay, well, you just deserves. Not that I comply with that, but I'm just suggesting that there's many ways that things can be actually correlated. But very exciting talk today. Thank you so much. Great contribution from everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks, Shishir, and thanks very much to everyone. It was a very interesting session, and I learned a lot from it, and hope you did too. Our next session will also feature Tori Biles, and topic will be Philosophy of Psychology, Embodied Realism and the Economy of Being. Thank you all for coming, and looking forward to see you next time.